just had a song on my heart. It's actually a Bob Dylan song. It was written, I think, 1997, I believe. And a lot of people have covered it. And when I sing it, I think of it as being sort of a message, like from the creator to their creation.
I was just going to ask if there was any kids here this morning. I think there's some upstairs. I was hoping there'd be a few more.
Meg's here and Jack's here.
And Maggie's here. Who's in? Oh yes, and Jack is here. So, how many kids or big kids have ever tried something new? Any ever? Never? So, I have some grandkids, you guys know, and sometimes I send them videos quite often, and sometimes I write them little rhymes or stories or songs. So this week, a few of them had some firsts, either kindergarten or a new grade or pre-K, and they were very excited. And this little rhyme started, and then I had a bad tooth. It's a long story. I couldn't get there to keep it coming. And then I found out a couple of them had a really hard time when it came right down to the first day, like getting on the bus and things like that. And I went out and walked around my yard, and then this longer version, I call it New Things, a motto, and then there's New Things, a long version for hard days. So I'm gonna teach you the motto first, and we'll just do it like 3 times. And then I've just put a little melody to it, and I'll sing through the long version just because music and melody helps us remember. So we'll say it first. It is, how's it go now? When new things feel hard, I remember they won't. If I try and I try and I try till they don't. Let's do it one more time. When new things feel hard, I remember they won't. If I try and I try and I try till they don't. So I'm gonna sing that once, and then I'm just gonna kind of continue through the long version. It's not real long, but it can feel a little bit like the song that never ends because it's the same melody. Okay. So, Bill, in a minute, you can just change that to the next one. When new things feel hard, I remember they won't. If I try and I try and I try till they don't. When new things feel hard, I remember they won't. If I try and I try and I try till they don't. When new things feel hard, remember they won't. If you try and you try and you try till they don't. But some days you'll try and you'll try even more. You'll try till you fall in a heap on the floor. And you'll want to give up and you'll want to give in. And you'll want to run home and hide in a bin. But chin up, sweet love, those days come and they go, and a new one shows up, so be ready to roll. And whether you try or whether you don't, whether you cry or whether you don't, these 2 things will always be true. You are awesome, and I believe in you. New things. Oh, if anybody wants a little, we can like photocopy a little bottle copy, and there is a long version that I've sent to my grandkids. Okay, let's sing a couple more together.
That's really neat.
I keep fighting voices in my mind that say, not enough. Every single lie that tells me I will never measure up. think I am weak. You say I am held, and I am falling short. When I don't belong, you say I am yours. I believe what you say of me. I believe the only thing that matters now is everything you think of me. You, I find my worth in you. I find my identity. You say I am loved, and I can't feel a thing. You say I am strong, and I think I am weak. You say I am held, and I am falling short. When I don't belong, you say I am yours. I believe what you say of me. I believe, and I believe what you say of me. I believe, taking all I have and now I'm laying it at your feet. You have every failure, God. You'll have every victory. You say I am loved, and I can't feel a thing. You say I am strong, and I think I am weak. You say I am held, and I am falling short. When I don't belong, you say I am yours. I believe what you say of me. I believe what you say of me. I believe. He is jealous for me. Love's like a hurricane. I am a tree bending beneath the weight of his wind and mercy. When all of a sudden I am unaware of these afflictions eclipsed by glory. Realize just how beautiful you are and how great your affections are for me. He is jealous for me. Love's like a hurricane. I am a tree bending beneath the weight of his wind and mercy. When all of a sudden I am unaware of these afflictions eclipsed by glory, and I realize just how beautiful you are and how great your affections are for me. And oh, how he loves us so. Oh, how he loves us. How he loves us so. And oh, how he loves us so. Oh, how he loves us. How he loves us so. He loves us, oh how 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 he loves us. Oh, how he loves. We are his portion and he is our prize. Drawn to redemption by the grace in his eyes. If grace is an ocean, we're all sinking. Heaven made surf like a sloppy wet kiss. My heart turns violently inside of my chest, and I don't have time to maintain these regrets when I think about it. He loves us, oh, how he loves us, oh, how he loves us, oh, how he loves.
Oh. Maybe I'll just say something. This was really good. Paul's gonna share some with us a new book that he's just written, and just tell us a little bit about it. And it's called Pauper of Misfortune. Paul's written. Oh yeah, I should give you mine. Here you go. I just say that Paul's written other books. Paul's written poetry books. He's written children's books, sometimes children's poems.
Yeah.
Yeah, and he's presented some things here before, but this is a brand new book. So
I don't know if I can do this.
you want to stand or something?
Yes, I do. I want to stand for this piece. Oh, listen.
Oh, you want to stand for that? Okay, I got it.
Yeah,
There you go.
Yeah, I'm doing this with a lot of anxiety and nervousness because I get this way. This book is a book about living with concurrent disorders, and that's living with a mental health disorder and addictions. It's been a long time since I smoked dope or drank alcohol or anything like that. But it continues, the journey goes. I'll read you just a little bit on the back. And it says, reading Pauper of Misfortune reveals a person largely at peace with himself, his situation, and the world at large. It's optimistic even as it acknowledges that dealing with any addiction, to say nothing of doing so while suffering with a concurrent disorder, isn't a walk in the park. It requires constant vigilance and commitment. In writing this account of his own journey and the reflections it has provoked for him, Paul Dupuis provides a model and hope for any and all who struggle with addictions and mental illness. That's a part of an intro written by a friend of mine, Carol Gillen. I don't know what to say, really. I used to talk about this stuff all the time and sometimes do workshops and readings and that, and I used to be quite comfortable with it. I'm not like that anymore. Now I feel really vulnerable and it scares the hell out of me. But, I just got a couple notes here. It's, this book was on the back burner for a couple of years. It was done before the pandemic hit. And Walter was good enough to read it over for me and did some editing and stuff like that. And it's turned out to a much better project. It's about one day at a time recovery or living, and that's really important for people who live with disorders like I do. And it's not just my story, it's things that I have observed and lived and have done to stay in what I call one day at a time recovery. I had a friend of mine, his name is Bill, called him Mickey, and we used to meet every Thursday at Something's Brewing, and we would bring our writings, and we kept each other honest about what we were doing, and he gave me some input, but I threw it away because I don't know. But I did, right? But then Walter fixed it up for me, so it worked out okay. What can I say? And this project was on the back burner. It is on a website I did. But now it's in Amazon.ca or whatever it is. And I talked to Mark Peterson about it, and Mark did an awful lot of work with this and somehow put it on Amazon, and it was kind of weird. It was like, Mark told me these would come yesterday, and I was quite anxious, and I'm thinking I'm going to be up here without a book because I didn't think it would come on time, but it did. So which is nice. It's a small book. I like the cover Mark did the cover, and the theater, right, the happy face and the sad face, and that's what life can be like. I'm just going to read you a little bit about it, and thank you, Mark, and thank you, Walter. If I can find just a little bit. I do have a little bit right here. Okay. This is the introduction. And it says, trapped in the disease of addiction while concurrently living with a psychiatric disorder, I lost my wellness and my being. Much of my life was spent ill. And in my illness, I jeopardized friendships and relationships with people who I held dear in my heart. But I was just too sick to realize the heartache my condition was causing to others. In my illness, I have been to hell and back. If you choose to read this book, you might find a beginning to one day at a time recovery. You might say, me too. You might say that you can give this book to any of a number of people you know, and then perhaps they will relate to the experience and reflections I am sharing. And this person or these people will understand that wellness and recovery is a personal responsibility. Awakening to one's reality in this time, one day at a time, living happens to most of us. That's a big thing, one day at a time living. I don't talk a lot about God in this book, but God, I've had some kind of faith in God, And I think God pulled me through a lot, right? I've had a couple of suicide attempts. I don't really talk about them in this. And by the grace of God, I was a survivor and have gone on to have a fairly decent life. My wife, Brenda, has been a great support for me. And, you know, she even, I couldn't have wrote this if it wasn't for her. I don't even think I'd be here. But this is a book. I've got a few copies. It's $10 a copy. You can ask Mark Peterson about it. He read it. And some people say some nice things about it. But it's not just about me. It's about people who live with this kind of disorder. And hopefully they'll be able to find, or will be able to find, one day at a time recovery and become healthy. And I think of myself as a semi-productive person. I do live with a disability, but I'm the guy who used to clean your church here. Also, too, I have another side job. But come Tuesday, I won't be able to do anything because I'm going to get a new hip. So that is one of the reasons why I'm anxious up here today. But the reality is I'm scared to death because when I used to do the workshops and the talks and all that, I had no fathom of an idea of how stigmatized this illness can be. And I've experienced a lot of it, but when I was younger, I had I can't say the courage, the innocence to fight and try and carry a message. Today I know I'm older and I'm wiser and that, you know, there's a lot of people who just don't want anything to do with this kind of message and people don't understand. But in reality, we're people and that's what we are. And if you want a copy, you can talk to me after church. If not, it's on Amazon. Thank you.
Paul, you talk about your blog? Other people
On my blog, yeah.
you want to follow along the journey?
Yeah, I have a website. Rick did that. Rick's a really good guy. But on it too, there's a multimedia ebook, and it's got probably about 14 poems, and I read them. And the only reason they sound decent is because Rick doctored them up and put them together and made them okay, right? But then also too, there's a blog on it, and it's a one day at a time blog that I write, and it's about living in recovery. Some people like it. I mean, there's been a few reads and a few people following it. The main thing is, if it helps one person, that's what matters, right? If it helps one person, that's what matters. And thank you, Rick.
BeWellToday.ca.
Be well together.
That was awesome, thank you. And Jess has an announcement.
Hi. So last week, Walter and I shared a bit about the transitional plan and the process of the Imagination team. If this is all sounding new, I apologize. You can listen to last week's service. Also, there will be an email going out with longer explanations sometime this week. Just an update though, if you were here last week, that we got the happy news this week that Rachel Barham will be stepping in as the LC facilitator, Leadership Collective facilitator, on that new Leadership Collective. Yes, so you can look again at those documents in the weeks to come, but from now until October 9th, when Peter and Mary Ellen retire, you're going to hear from members of the Imagination team just sharing personally about what the process was like for them. And it's really meant to be a time where you can listen and maybe come back with questions, insights, whatever you want. We want to hear from you. So today we're going to hear from Kendall just briefly. Okay, great.
There, can you hear me?
Oh, yeah.
Okay. So we were asked as members of the Imagination team, there was 6 of us in the end, right? Yeah, and we met from about January until the end of July and said, what are we gonna do? So we were asked to come together as a group by members of the leadership team to say, imagine what the next version of church might be, right? And so just here to share a couple of our reflections. What was that like along the way? One of the things for me about what it was like is that it was freeing and daunting, because the leadership team came to us and sat down and said, here's the process, do it. And we said, okay, how? What's the structure? And they said, do it. And we went, oh, okay. So like this? We're like, sure. So that was encouraging to me, because it really identified the openness that there was going into this process, and saying we want to really, really be open, not with these little caveats in the background, right? About what next steps might be. So that was an encouraging piece for me to kind of step off the process, start it off, and to say, okay, what's this going to be like? The next piece that stood out to me as I reflected on the process was what we engaged in. So the imagination team engaged in the sense of storytelling. As we said, we're going to try and figure out what's supposed to be next, and there's literally no blueprint right now. I mean, maybe don't like turn everything completely on its head, but if there's no blueprint, where do we start? Like, where do we really start from? So we just started with each other and said, well, we got us. Who are you? You know, so we got to know each other and said, what's your background? What's your experiences? What's your hopes? What are your biases? What are you bringing to this that you got to watch out for, you know, as we step forward? And so we did that. And then we reached out and went wider to other people in the community. We put out a survey, we approached individuals and we asked them questions. And same thing, we went through a storytelling process. And that piece to me was, at the beginning, I advocated for it and I felt like it was an important thing, like we needed to do it. But you don't kind of understand why until you do it. So when we did it is when things stood out. And it just energized me. And all the imagination team, when we come together and share the examples from the storytelling, the themes that ran through that were, this is a lot of work because we're volunteering to do this and trying to fit this into the rest of our lives, but it's so good, I just want to do more, you know? And that was surprising to me as we listened to people and were energized as they told us, you know, their hopes for church, their fears for church, their thoughts about what might be good. And that process was just so good. And we walked away from that saying, somehow we can't stop this. We got to keep doing this thing in the future version of church, right? And so I'll leave that with you, because I think all of us need to do that together. Just how do we do that? And sometimes you get into those moments and you're like, yeah, this is really good. We've got to keep doing this thing. So that was something that stood out to me from that. The other thing that stood out is, because we were starting from kind of a blank slate, was saying, how are we actually figuring out what we propose should be? And it was encouraging to me as we listened that we actually heard threads, right? So we put all the information together. We didn't just like listen and walk away. We actually like wrote it down and organized it and tried to figure out what was coming through. And we saw between what the imagination team had thought, what we had seen the leadership team build before, and what we were hearing from people, we actually saw threads and we saw themes. And the documents that Jess is talking about that talk more about the process is part of the pulling together of those threads and then feeding it back and to say, this is what we've heard. This is where we think we want to go, the community wants to go, all those kinds of things. Now, alongside those threads, there were also non-threads, because we had biases walking in. So one of my biases is, most of you would notice, you don't normally see me down here, right? I haven't been down here in a long time. I'm usually upstairs at the first service, and that's part of what I love. And one of my biases was, well, church is changing, things have happened. Maybe people don't want to do a second service anymore. Maybe they want to try different things. I was wrong. People like the second service, right? And it's like, it's not that I don't like it, but I find my value up there, right? And so those were examples of things that we listened to and went through the process. We were surprised in different ways. Surprised in things that we heard and things that we didn't hear. And so those are, you know, that's part of my experience and part of what my surprises were. Another piece that I wanted to share was what was really cool about being in the imagination team was watching us function as a collective, as a team. So the proposal for the name Leadership Collective that leads the church moving forward, I think partly came out of that experience where we said there's not a leader amongst us, right? And part of my inclination, I would say at least, was coming into the group being like, if there's no plan, there's no blueprint, there's no nothing, how are we actually gonna get anything done? You know, we've got a timeline. We don't have 5 years to figure this out. We've got a timeline to figure it out. Instead of just chatting around and sitting around talking about nice ideas, people are expecting something at the end of this. We're supposed to put something forward. And if somebody doesn't, you know, take charge, is anything gonna happen? And there was a challenge. Rachel was a great person who challenged that within the group and said, I think we really need to disperse the leadership and we need to share all the activities and we come to it together. So we did that. And it worked, which was really cool to see, you know, because for me, this is one of those things that you hear about in classes and theories and, you know, this would be a great way to operate. Your business should go like this. Your nonprofit should operate like this. And it's like, yeah, but how often does that actually happen? And it was cool to see it happen, where we really shared the tasks of leading the group and taking charge of different things. And that was a really encouraging piece to me. Because it's kind of what we're proposing with the Leadership Collective moving forward as well. That it's just really like this group of people really just shares the tasks, shares the common responsibilities, disperses the roles, that kind of thing. So through all of that, the piece that I say is that this whole process birthed some renewed hope in me. You know, again, coming through the pandemic and lots of people re-examining things saying, is church really important to us anymore? Is the way that we've done it important? Is there still needs for the things that we have? And I went into this without presumptions of that, saying, maybe yes, maybe no. Let's just listen and be honest with the answer and not try and presuppose coming in. So I felt hope that there is still a role, right? And there is some good suggestions on moving forward and what that's going to look like. And yeah, so that's a little snapshot on my piece and my participation in the Imagination team. So yeah. And upstairs we had a few moments for questions and stuff like that. I'm not sure, do we want to like maybe leave that afterwards if people have? Can people who were part of the Imagination team just stand up for a second for those who don't know necessarily? So there's this group here, and then Julie Peregrine, or does she go by Julie Kelly? I say Julie Peregrine. Yeah, Julie Kelly, okay. And Alex Henderson are the other members. So at any time, pull on us aside, sit us down and say, hey, what about this? Do you think about this? What are you figuring out about this? And guess what? We don't have it all figured out. 100% guaranteed. So the other thing that we're saying is the process between now and October 9th, the process between now and January 1st, when the Leadership Collective is easing into the new process, is to say, ask questions, all the ideas back and forth. Be part of the, you know, the ideas going, it's not all figured out, and it's going to be figured out together, okay? So, that's it. Thanks.
That's it.
Thank you, Kendall. So for prayers today, I think we should hold up the service that we're going to do for Tony this afternoon at 2 o'clock this afternoon. I am thinking that especially we should be praying for Shani and Nathaniel. You know, just for them to be full of strength. Shani in particular, with her disease, it's sometimes so difficult for her to be in certain situations, and she's been off and on very strong this week. So I hope this is a great, strong moment for her. So why don't we just do a moment of silence for that, and then go into the Lord's Prayer. Lord, I pray that this service this afternoon honors Tony. I pray that there's great strength for Shani, and for Nathaniel, and for other family members and others who love Tony and Shani. We pray that it's a very rich time. We pray that it's a time in which people have a sense that they're being upheld by kindness, by grace, by love, from friends and also from you. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, the power, and the glory, forever and ever. Amen. Pete reminds us to do the Lord's Prayer every week, so even if we don't do it in the service, usually he and I do it afterwards. So I'm just going to bring a short talk to close the service, and I've actually asked Pam, and I'm asking now of Tina and Rick, if you guys would mind doing the first song over again at the end of the talk. It's such an interesting thing after 30 years to be sort of steering towards the end of this job, this calling, this whatever it is, and there's some very wonderful services coming up next week. Jeff is speaking, talking about Zimbabwe and Eden's Children's Village that he and Carol have been so involved in, and the next week after that, Jess is speaking. And the next week after that, Brad Jerzak is speaking. And in our communion service, our Thanksgiving service, it's actually the 30th birthday of our church. So we picked that about 9 months ago. We thought that would be a great time to retire. And that would give time, 9 months, for an imagination team to figure out what they wanted to do next. So it's been kind of a journey for, you know, this last year I've thought several times, what would I like to say, you know, as parting words, you know, that kind of thing. So today, one of the things that I asked for, just in my own little secret prayers, I said, you know, Lord, I've got some good material to bring, but it doesn't feel particularly alive. It doesn't feel, sometimes there are moments when I get an idea before I come in that I just think, that's what I wanted to say. It's on fire. You know, I almost don't need notes on days like that. It's just, it feels like something's come from some place. Maybe from God, maybe from my unconscious, maybe from the right hemisphere of my brain. I don't know where these wonderful treasures come from, but sometimes I come in loaded with a treasure. Yesterday I waited all day for a treasure. I couldn't find anything. But I was studying one of a saint that I don't know very well, really, although I did quite a lot of research on her during the COVID period, and I prepared a video lecture on her. But I was getting ready to teach her again in an upcoming module, so I read a book about her yesterday, and then later I started to read some of her own materials, and it seemed to me that I would just bring a little bit of her best ideas. Her name is Julian of Norwich. And so I'll just give you a few thoughts from Julian of Norwich to close today. I asked, my secret prayer was, you know, if it's not particularly on fire, God, could we at least have some kind of connection in the service? And then the first song that Pam sang was almost exactly what I wanted to communicate. So I was going, yes, that's nice. And then the next song was Tina saying, this is the song that I've written for my grandchildren as they go to school, and they have a short text and a long text. I'll tell you in a moment why that's important. We'll need to put those words back. In England, in the 14th century, there was a weirdness that it's hard to believe, called the sumptuary laws. Have you ever heard of them? Have you ever heard of the sumptuary laws? The sumptuary laws defined what kind of clothing you were allowed to wear, depicted according to class. There were 7 different categories in England. Prostitutes, sex trade workers had to wear a certain kind of clothing. Jews had to wear a certain kind of clothing. Muslims had to wear a certain kind of clothing. And here's some of the laws from the 1300s. There were 3 big parliamentary decisions that came out. One is 13, that's too far away. The first one was 1336, then 1337, a little bit of an addition, and then a major addition in 1363. So the sumptuary legislation of 1336 attempted to curb expenditure and preserve class distinction. One of the acts stated the following: no knight under the estate of a lord, esquire, or gentleman, nor any other person shall wear any shoes or boots having spikes or points which exceed the length of 2 inches, under the forfeiture of 40 pence. I mean, it seems a little controlling. The sumptuary legislation of 1337 was designed to promote English garments and restrict the wearing of furs. The English sumptuary laws of 1363 included the following ideas. Women were, in general, to be dressed according to the position of their fathers or husbands. Wives and daughters of servants were not to wear veils that cost more than 12 pence. Handcraftsmen's and yeomen's wives were not to wear silk veils. The use of fur was confined to the ladies of knights with a rent who paid more than 200 marks a year in rent. I mean, it's just an absurd standard, isn't it? And the wife or daughter of a knight was not to wear cloth of gold or sable fur. The wife or daughter of a knight bachelor was not to wear velvet. The wife or daughter of an esquire or gentleman was not to wear velvet, satin, or ermine. This is so specific. The wife or daughter of a laborer was not to wear clothes beyond a certain price or a girdle garnished with silver. Cloth of gold and purple silk were confined to women of the royal family. The importation of silk and lace by Lombards and other foreigners were forbidden. So this is, I don't know, what do you think? How do they monitor that? Well, they monitored it by, in some cities, you could be put in jail. I've heard that you could possibly be put to death if you wore something that made you look like you were in a higher class. So they had a sort of a sense of control. These sumptuary laws distinguished 7 social categories and made members of each class easily distinguished by their clothing. Also, during this time in churches, people took communion in hierarchical order according to class. So knights and nobles would go first. There actually are records of people breaking into violent confrontations because somebody went before them and someone else thought, no, I'm of a higher social position than you. Just like Jesus. I mean, the irony is just incredible, isn't it? It's like you just think, how did Christianity ever become so bonkers? And then you look at the American South. In 1348, 1349, the bubonic plague swept through Europe. In cities like Norwich was the second most important city in England, London the biggest, but Norwich was an important port. And about half of Norwich was killed by the plague. So think of living in a time when a plague could wipe out 50% of a city's population. This also happened in Siena, many cities across Europe. And then it came in waves afterwards. Every few years there would be waves. And so we have Julian of Norwich, who is an anchorite. And does anybody know what an anchorite is? Well, and I didn't either until a few years ago, and I'm not even sure that I want to know. Like, in the Middle Ages, some people were so devout that, and in the case of one person that I studied, this was done for her, but some people were so devout that they wanted to give themselves into a state between life and death, and they would live forever in an apartment attached to a church. Sometimes it was almost like a tomb, a small apartment, and they would be bricked in so that they could never leave. And they would there devote themselves to prayer. Sometimes they would have a window to the street so people could go and ask them spiritual advice. But this would be a lifetime. And in some cases, people were there, if they were from a noble class, a servant would be put in there with them to take care of their practical needs. And of course. So an anchorite was someone who was anchored to the church. I mean, there were other forms of anchorite, but this was something that happened. And Julian was an anchorite in Norwich. In fact, we don't know her name because she was an anchorite at St. Julian's Church. So all we know is the anchorite at St. Julian's. And over time, she came to be called Julian of Norwich. And she is, she's a particular favorite of some people. Thomas Burton said his favorite by far. He said, I used to find my greatest inspiration from St. John of the Cross, but now that I've found Julian, never would I trade her. So what is it about this person? We have record of other people going and asking her questions, so we know she had some kind of an ability to speak to people. But she lived attached to the church in prayer. And she gets very sick when she's 30 years old. And of course, it's 1373, so the plague is still coming in waves, and she mentions that she had nothing left to live for. So I'm assuming that the rest of her family was killed in the plague. 1348, 1349, the plague is coming through in its massive wave, but it's going to come in short waves after, smaller waves every few years after that. So she's sick, and I'm assuming that people would think it's the plague, but anyway, a priest comes to help her with last rites, and he tells her to look at the cross. And she looks at the cross. They're all convinced that she's dying, and she's convinced that she's dying. And she had been trying to look towards heaven to get ready for meeting the Lord, but instead she looks at the cross. And as she does so, something happens. And in the next 24-hour period, actually a little less than that, she has 15 visions. And in these 15 visions, she learns something about the love of God. She sees the blood of Jesus from this crucifix flowing copiously, flowing over everyone, rich and poor. So here we live in a social situation where everything is defined by class, and then she sees the exact opposite. She sees Jesus just flowing, the blood of Jesus flowing like love over everybody, kinning is the word that's used, drawing everybody together as equals. So it's actually quite subversive in a way, what she's saying. Another thing that's subversive is she's probably the first woman to write in English. And another thing that's subversive is that she's writing in vernacular. And another thing that's subversive is she's doing speculative theology in English. And you're not allowed to do that. There was a law saying you couldn't do it except in Latin, and you had to have a certain degree before you could do speculative theology. She was a woman. And so this is, in some ways, she's kicking ass here. You know, she is really, in some ways, an early feminist. Plus, she depicts God as mother most of the time. She depicts God as God as him, but also as mother. She's got a lot of nurture things, and even speaks of God openly as mother. So there's a lot of things that are making people today kind of go back and look at Julian and going, wow, she's kind of exciting. But because these are ideas that we treasure a little bit more today than we did traditionally. But what happens is she has these 15 visions, and then she has a 16th one that comes that confirms the first 15. And then she writes it all down in a short text. And then she thinks about it for 15 years and she writes a long text. So, I don't think we've ever had a song here before where somebody said, I've written this song, this is the short version, then I thought about it and I wrote a longer version. It's just a silly coincidence, but it meant something to me. So, the one day I choose to talk about Julian of Norwich. So, short text and long text. They're all based on the same visions, but the long text has some thought. And I think it's really worth reading. But let me tell you just some of the most important ideas that come from her. And that'll probably be enough for today. Jesus' death wasn't so much about a substitutionary atonement. I don't really spend a lot of time thinking about the meaning of Jesus' death. I mean, it's a part of my work in church history. I have to be aware of the different theories, but it's never been something that's really grabbed me. I feel that it's important. I don't understand it. I've been at peace with not understanding it, you know. But over the years, there have been some important theories. Some people thought that the death of Jesus was an incredible victory over Satan. some people thought that the death of Jesus was some kind of a penal substitution. You know, that humans had sinned, they were full of original sin. Satan had a claim for justice, so God substituted his own son to take the punishment. Some people have thought that. Others have thought it's more of an example. He's trying to show us what love does. It's more of an example. So there have been these various theories. I think the one that I like the best is almost like sort of a blend of Albert Schweitzer and René Girard, and the idea is it's that humans have coping mechanisms, and our best one is that we tend to blame everybody else instead of allowing the blame to come on us. We don't want to be accountable ourselves, so we do whatever it takes to make sure that the blame goes on somebody else. And that's been our main coping mechanism, which allows us, in Lord of the Flies terms, to kill Piggy. You know, but so what we do is we put the blame on something, and then we all feel better once that person bears the punishment, or some group does. And so there's this kind of, and then that lasts for a while until we need a new Piggy. You know, so this has been going on throughout history. And then what Albert Schweitzer suggests is that Jesus kind of puts a ramrod in the midst of that and just stops it. And in the midst of stopping it, he shows that it's really meant to go the exact opposite way. And in doing that, he not only shows us the example, he makes some kind of a change which makes it easy for God's Spirit to flow into us and gives us the courage to take on accountability and to choose that. So, I think that's the one I thought was best. Julian's is even better. Julian thinks that it's because Jesus is so in love with everything that has been made that he can't help but be completely identified. And so his suffering and his blood and everything is just pouring into every crevice, every bit of the earth, the creation, and all of us, whether we believe in God or whether we don't. And what it's doing is it's somehow becoming one with us and attuning us back to God. It's kind of an incredible thought. So that's why I just fell in love with Pam's song, the Bob Dylan song, because I just thought it's amazing. It's exactly saying what I think. And so that's one huge idea from Julian. Another one is she sees all of creation in a hazelnut. She sees a tiny little hazelnut and she says, that's what all of creation is. It's so tiny, it's so fragile, it could disappear in a second. And then she hears God say, yeah, I created it, I love it, I preserve it, it won't leave because I'll hold on to it. So that's a beautiful thought. And then she says, I realized that sin is serious, but it's not what we think it is. It's not what, from God's perspective, sin is not serious. It's serious in the way that we think it is. We think it somehow puts some kind of a barrier between us and God. She says, no, it's not like that at all. Sin just blinds us. Nothing can put a barrier between us and God. And she says, in fact, what we're going to learn one day is that our sins are actually like the wounds that we bear as we try to grow, and they will be considered honors in heaven, badges of honor. So she just has a much more beautiful way of looking at everything, because in these 15 visions, it's like she gets a snapshot at a point in time. In fact, time is different for her. She doesn't think of time as linear. She thinks of everything as being held in this moment, in all ways, by God. So in this mystical vision, mystical experience that she has, she sees something about a love that saturates and pulls and builds until it draws us all back. She tries to cover herself because she could be put to death for some of what she's saying, because she isn't specifically saying that only Christians get saved. So she says, I'm sure the teaching of the church is right. I love Mother Church. I trust the church. She says, but I did hear Jesus say to me, there's a surprise coming. And because she said, because the most famous line of all, you must know it, it's, sin is necessary, Jesus says to her, but all will be well, and all will be well, and every kind of thing will be well. And she says, hold it, how can that be true if some people are going to be left outside of this love? That becomes her next question. And then she says, Jesus says to me, there's a surprise coming. So she begins to hint at this
So I just thought I'd just bring reflections from Julian and just say all will be well, and all will be well, and all manner of thing will be well. Doesn't mean that things are not hard. Doesn't mean that things aren't terribly hard sometimes, but also in the midst of it, something behind the scenes, I think, is happening, which is the saturation of love, which is drawing us all together towards an understanding of the good and a desire to live the good. Especially wonderful when we do it together. So, Tam, if you don't mind, one more time, I thank you so much. So we'll just close with the song.
Thank you. And I don't know if you can do this, but I just love it if you try to imagine it as though God is speaking to you and to everybody. Instead of Bob Dylan.
When the rain is pouring in your face and the whole world is on your case, I can offer you a warm embrace to make you feel my love. When the evening shadows and the stars appear, and there is no one to dry your tears, I can hold you for a million years to make you feel my love. I know you haven't made your mind up yet, but I would never do you wrong. I've known it from the moment that we met. No doubt in my mind where you belong. I go hungry, I go black and blue. I go crawling down the avenue. No, there's nothing that I wouldn't do to make you feel my love. Storms are raging on the rolling sea and on the highway of regret. The winds of change are blowing wild and free. You ain't seen nothing like me yet. I can make you happy, make your dreams come true. Nothing that I wouldn't do. Go to the ends of the earth.
earth for you, to make you feel my love, to make you feel my love, to make you feel my love.
Thank you so much. Gorgeous. So I hope we can be saturated with the love that we can feel, and that that we realize that our own weaknesses and defects are really nothing in the eyes of God, and nothing to have regrets about.
Pete,
Yeah,
what's going, what you think Bill wants the church Latin in it?
something's going on here.
Yeah.
Yes, there